Dr. Jessica Spafford is a professor of music and a colleague of mine at Emory and Henry College. She is an international opera singer, clinician, and recitalist. Her current research includes the history of opera in Appalachia, as well as the correlation between music and politics during crucial world events. Jess is an excellent colleague and a very good friend, and I am excited that we will be co-leading a trip to Cuba over New Year's Eve next year. Stay tuned for that. So please help me welcome my friend and colleague, Jess Spafford.
Thank you. Well, good morning, and thank you for inviting me to be with you today. As Mark said, I'm a music teacher, but what he didn't share is that I'm also a foodie, a wine lover, a Beatles fan, a hiker, gardener, and obsessed with my cat, perhaps to an unhealthy degree. I walk her on a leash every day. If you have questions, we can talk about it afterwards. When Mark first asked me to come speak with you all, I was a little bit at a loss. I have never been to a Unitarian Universalist church. I was raised Catholic, left, and went Buddhist for a while, was agnostic for a hot minute, and now I'm a Christian who is living in a time where I'm afraid to say that because of all the conservative connotations associated with it that I don't agree with. It's hard to understand how to exist in a landscape where so many faiths have been hijacked in the quest for power. It's truly an honor to be here with you at this UUCH, a place that celebrates diversity, inclusivity, and interconnectedness of all beings. Today, I want to share a topic with you that is close to my heart, vulnerability, and explore its profound connection to singing and the human experience. In a world that often emphasizes strength and stoicism, vulnerability becomes a revolutionary act, a pathway to genuine connection and community. It's a word we're all familiar with, but it has various connotations. As a voice teacher, I deal with this on a regular basis. There is inherent necessity to being vulnerable as a musician. Every time you open your mouth or step on a stage, you are at risk. My students have to be vulnerable enough to share their voices with me in lessons and allow me to constructively critique their technique. I, as the teacher, am vulnerable too. Every time I go to demonstrate for them, I need to be able to practice what I preach. Sharing your voice is the most intimate form of music making. This isn't a diss on any other kind of instrumental endeavor. It is simply a fact of physiology. Your voice is determined by your genetic makeup and by your body. You can't simply go out and purchase a new one if you don't like the way that it sounds. It is a part of who you are, and that's a terrifying thing to share with people because it's so intimate. And it changes with everything. How we're feeling that day, the temperature, what we recently ate, if we're dehydrated, and so on. Annabelle, thank you for the nods back there, yeah. It also plays tricks on us. If you've ever heard yourself on an answering machine or in a voicemail, it usually doesn't sound like the voice we think we have in our own heads. How do you dare to share something so private and so unpredictable? It requires a great deal of courage and vulnerability. If you Google what it means to be vulnerable, it says, being vulnerable means being in a position where other people can hurt you. It also says it means expressing the sides of yourself about which you have the least confidence or certainty, and allowing others to respond to them. I think that last part is key, to allow others to respond to us, rather than deciding in advance for them what will happen and how they will react. There is a physical and emotional response to all of this too. We often retreat. Who likes to get hurt? Other people may see vulnerability as allowing yourself to be taken advantage of, as a weakness to be avoided, or allowing others to see your shortcomings. But being vulnerable is a major strength. It is essential. It is authenticity in its rawest form. And yet, how do we do it? It requires trust, and our instinct is instead to run away, to not ask for what we need, to keep people at a distance, not sharing our frustrations, successes, and failures, to be the lone wolf, isolated, instead of seeing how other people can empower our lives, even if it's not in the way we might like or we might think. My students, especially the ones that haven't had lessons with me for very long, constantly apologize to me when they make mistakes, even if we're literally sight reading something I just put in front of them. I always make them stop and assess why they're apologizing. Usually they can't answer me. When we sing, we are learning to manage so much tension in our bodies, in our jaw, in our tongues, in the way that we're, with our lips, between abdominal and thoracic muscles. You're managing your breath, you're managing your face. There's a lot that goes into it. If you've ever been in a music building, there should be mirrors in a choir room, in practice rooms, and hopefully in the teacher's studios. We have to learn how to manage all of this and make it look easy. Similarly, that's true for acting. And if I brought all of my voice students to talk to you right now, they'd tell you that they hate it most when I make them sing in front of a mirror. We don't like to make eye contact with ourselves, and we certainly don't like to sing looking at ourselves. On countless occasions, no matter where I've been, that simple act of asking students to sing in front of a mirror has often induced tears and lots of mental breakdowns. Why? On some level, all teachers function as amateur psychologists, but it's a little extra true when you teach in the arts. Again, because what you are sharing is so profoundly you. I've done plenty of operas and recitals, and to this day, I'm always more nervous when I'm giving a recital by Jessica Spafford rather than playing Musetta in Puccini's La Bohème. We now live in a world that prizes fear-mongering, and it makes the task of being vulnerable that much more difficult, because being vulnerable allows us to have conversation, to wrestle with preconceived notions, and to face ourselves, much like a student looking in the mirror. It breathes life into creativity and helps us have compassion for others. It allows us to learn from mistakes and to provide space for hurt, forgiveness, and healing. Being vulnerable is uncomfortable because we don't know what's going to happen. Again, it takes a great deal of courage to face the potential of unrequited decency. Not too long ago, my therapist told me, "Jess, life is the process of learning to let go." That hit me. That phrase has so many meanings. To let go and sing in the face of fear, to let go of resentments that aren't serving us anymore, to let go of holding on to memories and people that aren't a part of our present, to let go of trying to control everything. It takes strength, work, and self-awareness. But what happens when people aren't willing to do the work? We get lazy, we get hurt anyhow, we shut down and box ourselves in, and we wither a little bit day by day. We miss that connection, and often hurt people just hurt others. That laziness is selfishness, and it always causes significant pain. In my world, it creates poor singers, fake actors, bad teachers, and so on. Words about vulnerability here are empty without action. Author Brené Brown says that when people around us aren't willing to be vulnerable, those are the people you need to tread carefully with. Don't be one of those people that perpetuates making someone else feel unsafe because of your own insecurity. In something small in my life, I've noticed something that I do now, since I've had some more hurt as I've gotten older, and we all experience life and it comes with troubles as we grow. But I do something now I didn't used to do. I used to walk around the grocery store and smile at people. I used to make eye contact and, nod, wish people a good day. And now I don't do that. Most of the time, I don't even make eye contact on purpose. Why? It has become easier not to engage. It's safer. It probably also makes me seem quite sketchy in Food City from time to time. It lets me focus on me to get what I want done in the time frame I want it done in, so I can go and do whatever else I want to do. Did you hear how many I's and me's there were in that sentence? Heaven forbid I see someone that I know and say hello. If you run into me in Food City or Food Country or wherever else we are, please call me out on it. I'm working on it. I'm sure a lot of you are not guilty of that when you are out and about. And it's weird because I am a total extrovert, but at least I'm aware of it and I'm open to changing it. And it takes personal introspection. Another thing stopping us from being vulnerable in our lives is that we focus on all the times that we got clobbered when we were vulnerable. But do we give credit to all the times that vulnerability was our aid and ally? What about when we fell in love, went for that job promotion, tried a new style of food, traveled to a new place, did community service, tried a new church, or learned a new skill? What would life be without it? What a world it would be if we could risk loving another person that we don't know well enough to start with grace rather than assumptions. In thinking about what I would say to you all today about vulnerability, I thought one of the best things I could do would be to be vulnerable with you about myself. So I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story of how I came to this area. In the spring of 2018, I was searching for a full-time teaching job after completing my doctorate at James Madison University. Before this, I had lived in Pennsylvania. I'm from north of Pittsburgh. I'd lived in Virginia, obviously, Ohio, and Austria and Germany, so I wasn't a stranger to moving around. That April, I was given one job offer in a little town called Marion, Alabama, about a half an hour north of Selma. My family did not want me to go, a little Yankee girl in the South. My best friend even cut out pictures of all the poisonous spiders of Alabama and put them all over my bedroom to try to convince me not to go. Let me tell you that where we are currently is significantly less rural than where I was moving to. For instance, by 2021, our college campus had a total of 148 students. There were less than 3,000 people in the entire surrounding area. And I was about 2 hours from Birmingham, Tuscaloosa was about an hour, Montgomery, anywhere. You put a pin in the middle of Alabama where there's nothing, that's where I was going. I cried the day I left Virginia because I had completely resigned myself to the fact that there was no way I was going to have friends. I wasn't going to be able to meet anyone or date anyone, and I was just going to be miserable for a hot minute. My sole goal was to get some things on my resume and leave as soon as humanly possible. Upon arriving there that August, multiple women and to-be neighbors came to bring me goodies, as Southern hospitality requires, cookies, vegetables, casseroles, and they all conveniently found a way into my home since the door was open while the movers were bringing my belongings in. But I love them. I also met the people that day that would become my best friends, my then boyfriend, and I ended up loving my job. It suddenly seemed like things might be okay. It was the exact opposite of what I had prepared for. My first year was incredibly joyful. I've truly never been happier with such ease. I loved my job, my historic faculty house, the warmth of the South, my boyfriend, my friends. I had all this time to work out regularly. I learned to kayak by borrowing someone else's and learned that it's one of my favorite things to do. It was bliss. The students were poor and rural, and I felt like I was doing really meaningful work in a place in this country that doesn't prize women's equality. Feminism was truly the F word there. I started a soup kitchen while I was there, but unfortunately the pandemic hit and it didn't maintain. 2 weeks before the start of my second year, so I didn't leave as quickly as I thought I was going to, all of the other music faculty quit. I had, previous to this, also signed a contract to teach as an adjunct at the University of Alabama, which was an hour away, one way. My college decided that they couldn't afford to replace anyone, so I had to become department chair, teach all of the classes by myself, meanwhile drive to and from 2 days a week to the University of Alabama, and I was already the director of study abroad. Usually a full-time teaching load is 20 to 24 credit hours a year. I taught 30 hours each semester. I have never been that tired in my entire life, and one day I fell asleep completely naked in my bathtub and missed the entire day of class. Then the pandemic hit, and where I was, no one believed in it. I had to teach in person the entire time, which had its pros and cons. The pandemic also ultimately drove my institution into the ground. On May 4th, 2021, I got a text message from a student asking me how they might finish their degree since the school was closing. I was confused because that hadn't been communicated to the faculty. In fact, we had all been told that the money had been raised and that the institution was going to be fine. But it had been published in the Alabama Baptist newspaper, and the newspaper was right. May is obviously not the best time of year to be searching for an academic job, since most positions have already been posted and filled. But I got lucky that Emory and Henry was looking for a new music professor. While I was driving here in June, the day of my interview, my boyfriend, who I thought was the love of my life, broke up with me over the phone. The day of my interview, after 3 years together. So I still had to go through with the interview once I got here. I don't know how I got this job. I continued north onto Pennsylvania to see my family after interviewing here, and not knowing whether or not I got the job. And when I got there, my dad called the family together that evening to tell us that he had been diagnosed with stage 2 cancer. My sister then also shared in the same time that she had suffered her 3rd miscarriage after 4 years of trying. You can imagine I felt like my life was falling apart. Shortly after, I learned I got the job here, and I moved to Glade Spring the last weekend of July 2021 and started work the first week of August. I didn't know anyone here. I didn't know the area, and it was still during the pandemic when many places were mostly closed. I've never been lonelier in my entire life. I was a complete disaster, regularly not keeping it together at home, and I did not handle most of these changes with grace. Eventually, I lost my best friend too. She couldn't handle the burden I had become. I deeply struggled with not wanting to live during my first year here, and I couldn't fathom how people could be so cruel to those that they claimed to care about. In my own arrogance and ignorance, this was not a struggle I ever thought I would face. But my dad had cancer, and I ultimately justified that I couldn't do that to my family during this time. So I trudged on, faking it as much as I could. Has life been easy? No. Am I where I thought I would be? Absolutely not. I thought I'd be married with kids and owning a home by now, but I'm single, renting, and childless with lots of student debt. But I am so happy. What a weird thing to say. I may not be fulfilled in all ways, and that will always be a part of the journey, but I sure have had an incredible life. I've traveled and lived in different countries. I've truly loved. I now have more friends than I ever imagined possible here. I have a nice roof over my head in a state that I once cried leaving. And I get to teach young people how to be better for themselves and each other every day through music. I now own my own kayak. And when I'm out on Hungry Mother Lake, I've got an appreciation for life like never before. And I'm thrilled to report that my dad is cancer-free, and I have 2 twin nieces who are just the most beautiful and perhaps aptly named Melody and Harmony. I'm not proud of my struggle, but I'm also no longer ashamed of it. I'm human. Some of it I chose, some of it I didn't. It has taken a lot of time to heal these wounds, but now I see them differently. I was forced to learn some of the hard lessons life has to offer, but I've grown. There's a youthful naivety that perhaps I've lost, but maybe what I've gained in wisdom instead is worth the trade-off. No one likes to get hurt, but we can't live in fear of when the next bad thing might happen. We can't live in fear of having the hard conversations when we don't know the outcome. We can't live in fear of staying in a job or a relationship that isn't good for us because we don't know where we'll land. Forgive me here, but as an avid Harry Potter fan, it feels important to share some words of wisdom from Dumbledore. We all have a choice in life between what is right and what is easy. It's easier not to be vulnerable. It's easier to fake it. It's easier to not smile at the person in the grocery store. It's easier to play it safe. It's easier to settle, and it's easier to judge than to engage. It's easier to turn inward instead of into our community. If you get nothing else out of my time with you this morning, I simply hope that you have the courage to evaluate ways in which you might be more vulnerable in your own lives. I wish that for each of you, because the wellspring of things that come from that exploration are so worth it, and I'm so glad I'm still here. Being vulnerable helps us do the right thing. It helps us to be creative, and it helps us to feed our soul with song. In closing, I'd like for us all to do something together, and it's going to require you to be vulnerable. This is something called a soul chord. It requires us all to sing, and that might be immediately frightening to some of you. I challenge you to be brave, to let go, and to be vulnerable. So the way this will work is that we will all start on a hum with a pitch all start. We're going to do this with our eyes closed. And so we'll all start on the same pitch together. I want you to listen to the sound bath in the room rather than focusing on your own individual voice. You might feel how your voice moves or you're called to move in this moment, and you are absolutely permitted, please do, switch from a hum to some open vowels. There are no wrong pitches. If it sounds like it clashes, great. Eventually we'll move through this together and ultimately wind back up together on our starting pitch on a hum. Are we ready? Okay. Can you close your eyes? Okay, I'm going to start us on a bass pitch. Hum with me, and then we're going to move around as you are led to. Okay, eyes closed. Here we go. Something interesting for today to build some community. You have to be vulnerable to try it. So thank you so much for participating and being creative with me. I appreciate you granting me the opportunity to share some of myself with you today.